Hey, what's going on? It is at the Letters, presented by Miller Lite, the original light beer. Arden Zwelling here with Ben Nicholson Smith, and we are live on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Sportsnet.ca to take your opening day questions as we are T minus 1 hour and about 7 minutes until it is Garrett Cole and Hyunjin Ryu opening the season in the Bronx. What should be a really interesting 2021 season for the Toronto Blue Jays. Ben, I want to thank our producer, Drew Livingston, for being here with us. If you have a question, you can leave it in one of the many chat boxes, whether you're on Twitter or you're on YouTube, you're on Facebook, wherever you are. Leave your question in there. Drew's going to be monitoring them and feeding them to Ben and I, and we'll get to them here throughout the next hour leading up to first pitch. But Ben, man, I gotta be honest with you. Like I may trend a little cynical sometimes. Like I may be a little jaded, but I am actually feeling pretty excited about getting a real actual baseball game that matters after 6 weeks of games that don't matter that much.
100%. And even after last year, right? To go from 60 games where you just get into the flow of the season and then it's over, to go back to 162. I mean, it's a crazy amount of baseball in a very short period of time to play 162 and
Yeah.
185. And it's time to buckle up. Once you get started, like it really comes at you fast. But this Blue Jays team is really interesting. So lots to discuss, lots to look forward to when it comes to watching it.
We're just going to learn so much this year. Like it really, I know the word unprecedented gets thrown around a stupid amount at this time of our lives, I guess, in society, but it really is unprecedented what's happening in baseball right now, going from a 60 game season to a 162 game one. Like so many of those stat lines that we saw in 60 games last year are going to look so ridiculous on baseball reference pages years from now when people are looking back on like that guy hit that in that year and that pitcher did that in that year. It's just going to be better to get a fuller sample of things. Like I think about somebody like, Steven Matz or Ross Stripling, right? It's, are they their 2020 selves? Marcus Simeon, another guy, right? Like a bunch of guys who had down years in 2020. Now we're going to get a full sample in 2021 to actually find out where they are at and whether the Blue Jays have made good bets on those guys or not.
Oh, 100%. And I just think, in the course of this season, we're going to get a lot of surprises. And I think that includes the Blue Jays. I mean, there are guys that took strides forward or maybe strides back that we're just not fully tuned in with because you don't get as much information in 60 games as you do in 162. So I think we should brace ourselves for the unexpected this year. I think we have to be ready for surprises because whether it's a big step forward from someone like, let's say it's an Anthony Kay, or whether it's a big step back from maybe this is the year Nelson Cruz falls off or Zach Greinke or some of these veterans. So it's going to be really interesting. And of course, Ryu versus Cole is the perfect way to get it started.
We're going to get to your questions in a couple of minutes, but let's just wrap up a couple of bits of news today. Ben, the Blue Jays finalizing their opening day roster. Julian Merriweather is on. Joel Payamps is on in the bullpen. Off the roster, designated for assignment, are Reese McGuire and Breivik Valera. And let's just focus in on Reese McGuire for a second, Ben, because I thought you made such a good point on the podcast this week in saying that, this decision like just got so much more oxygen than it really ever needed to. And we kind of do it every year. Like we did it, as you were mentioning, with Dalton Pompey. We did it with Anthony Alford. Like, let this be the final year that we make the mistake of spending 6 weeks talking about the 27th guy on the roster and talking about somebody who is inevitably going to end up on waivers at the end of spring training, is likely to pass through waivers, and is unlikely to be like a, frontline MLB contributor in their careers.
I mean, I'm making no promises on that front, Arden. I think that that's kind of an annual rite of spring, right? That you kind of zone in on that final couple of players on the roster and you try to zone in and, are they going to make it? Are they not? More so than maybe the number 3 starter or the solid third baseman you can kind of pencil in. So yeah, we'll see. We might be talking about a different waiver claim this time next year, but for Reese McGuire, he might get claimed. He might not. And
Yeah.
like I will not be surprised if he's on the taxi squad or in the alternate site, still in the organization. So the Jays had to move on, having Alejandro Kirk, a guy who projects to be one of the best offensive catchers in baseball from the get-go as a 22-year-old rookie. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch him, and he's going to give the Blue Jays a better chance to win games than Reese McGuire would.
Yeah, two things on that. One, like it's natural to talk about it a lot because it is like a bit of a pivot point, right? And you're looking for things to talk about over 6 weeks. You're like, what could be up in the air? Like, what's uncertain and what could change? Well, there's one, right? Like, there's a catcher on the 40-man roster who might not be on it anymore. But the thing is, if he was a much, much better player, we wouldn't talk about him that much because
No,
his roster spot would be certain. And there would be no question that he was going to be on the
exactly.
team, which is somewhat counterintuitive when you think about it. Obviously, the like the benefactor of this is Alejandro Kirk, who's in the Bronx. He's on the bench today, and maybe there's a pinch hit appearance late in the game for him. He's on this roster. He's going to be making starts. We're going to learn something about Alejandro Kirk now. Like the thing is,
Yeah.
our samples on him are so small. Last year, 25 plate appearances. They were great, and he was hitting missiles all over the park. But it's 25 plate appearances. Even his minor league samples, he doesn't have a full minor league season. So
Yeah.
it's going to be cool to get to see what he can do over 162, like over a 6 month grind, and to see how real the very promising potential that we have seen to this point in him as a young player is.
And it's not just Kirk. Vladdy, Bichette, Bo Bichette, Kevin Biggio, Nate Pearson. None of these guys have played a full 6 month season in the major league. So it's going to be the first chance for all of them to do that over 6 months.
We mentioned Julian Merriweather on the roster. I think he's got a really interesting role to play in this bullpen. Like he's kind of, he's not just a one inning relief guy. He might be to begin, like just as the Blue Jays being careful with him coming off the back issues dealing with in spring. But I think the ideal role for him is facing like 6 to 9 hitters, 20 to 40 pitches, trying to get 6 outs in most of his relief appearances. And the thing is, those don't all have to be relief appearances. He could open games too. Like he might run up a bunch of starts this year and come in and gas it out against a righty heavy lineup in the first couple of innings, and then turn things over to a bulk reliever or somebody who would have been a starter behind him, like think about a Trent Thornton or a TJ Zoik or an Anthony Kay or what have you. It's a valuable role in today's game, what Julian Merriweather is likely to do for this team. And if it's not in that, first inning on the days that he is coming in relief, he could be getting like pretty high leverage outs in the fifth and sixth innings, trying to get 6 outs and bridge things to the back end of the bullpen. Like, I think it's a useful arm for the Blue Jays if he can stay healthy.
It is. It is. And you need guys like that, especially when you look at the rotation as they begin the season, Arden. TJ Zoik is in that rotation. He is going to be facing the Yankees in all likelihood on Sunday. So that is, I mean, I'm sure people are watching right now and thinking that's not ideal. That's not what I necessarily am hoping for from the Toronto Blue Jays. And this is a team that will be able to hit its way out of a lot of trouble. So, we'll see how all of that unfolds. But the point being, this rotation needs help. So guys like Merriweather will have a role and will be needed on this ball club.
Yeah, it's not what the Blue Jays are hoping for either. They were hoping for Nate Pearson to be in this rotation and for Robbie Ray to be in this rotation. Obviously, both those guys are going to open on the IL. We can get to our first question here, and I will remind people that if you're on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you're watching, get your question in the chat box there, and Drew Livingston will forward it to us. So our first question actually comes from Facebook. It's from George, who asks, why was Nate Pearson left off the opening day roster? Well, George, Nate Pearson is injured. And perhaps you haven't been paying attention to Ben Nicholson Smith's fine reports coming out of the news coming out of Dunedin. Nate Pearson has a groin injury. They're calling it an adductor strain, and he's going to start the year on the IL. He hasn't been off a mound as far as we know. It's a big hit for the Blue Jays. It was supposed to be a big season for Nate Pearson. They were counting on him to pitch in the rotation. I guess my question to you, Ben, is like, what role do you think Nate Pearson assumes when he does return? Like, do the Blue Jays build him back up to a 5-6 inning starting pitcher? Are they trying to get 100 pitch outings out of him? Or is the temptation there to bring him back in something close to that Merriweather role where it's like, all right, maybe we'll use you in shorter bursts, 2-3 innings, even, 40-50 pitches, but then we'll use you much more frequently than we would have if you were just like an every 5 or 6 day starter?
It's got to be starting pitcher. It has to be. I think when you look at Pearson's upside, his potential, what he can do for this team, the best case scenario for him is still a starting pitcher. And I know he's had setbacks. I mean, we've seen them year after year for different reasons, but he has had a lot of setbacks. I still don't think that diminishes what he can eventually bring to this team as a starting pitcher. And I don't think that you want to swing him into a hybrid role before that, because he's so good that you want to get as many innings as you possibly can. So the best pathway to getting the most innings is to have him start games.
Yeah, this will be an interesting sort of bridge year in his development, right? Because I don't expect, 150 innings from Nate Pearson this year.
No.
Yeah, I think something around 100 is reasonable. Like that would be a really good outcome, even in just kind of continuing to build him up. Because remember, the ultimate outcome in all of this is that Nate Pearson is Justin Verlander in like a best possible outcome, right? Like where it's 200 innings every season, and he's maintaining his velocity into the fifth and sixth inning, and he's maximizing his potential, and he's healthy, and he's being like a front of the line ace. But that doesn't happen overnight. Like you aren't born as that. Like you need to, like, there's gradual progression here where you build up that workload and that basis, and those innings that you're going to rely upon to carry you through your veteran years. And like, Ben, I know you've thought about this a lot. Like, not many pitchers in MLB come in at age 22, 23, 24 and are just lights out, exceptional, ready to front a rotation. Like a lot of the time, Ben, it takes until your late 20s, even your 30s.
It really does. You think about the best pitchers in the game, guys like Shane Bieber. He burst on the scene maybe 24, 25. Jacob deGrom, it was late 20s. And even then, he wasn't at his peak. Those, of course, just being a couple examples. Garrett Cole was good young. Trevor Bauer was really good young as a college pitcher. So there are guys on the other side of things. But you look at Lucas Giolito, who might be, if Justin Verlander is the literal best case scenario for Nate Pearson, then Lucas Giolito is like a very good case scenario for Nate Pearson. And Lucas Giolito a couple years ago led the league in earned runs allowed. That's not to say Pearson has to go through that, but it is to say that if he needs a bit of time, there are very good reasons to give him that time and let him develop.
It's very hard what Nate Pearson's trying to do. Throw 97, 98, 99 over 6 innings, like maintain two breaking balls that are distinct from one another. So you think about like a curveball that goes up and down and a slider that goes side to side, trying to maintain a changeup, which like pitchers will tell you is the ultimate field pitch, one of the hardest pitches to really maintain, especially when you're kind of, you weren't like born with it or it didn't come naturally to you. You're kind of learning it. As Nate Pearson is, it's tough, man. So it's, I would preach a little bit of patience with young Nate Pearson. I know everybody wants the instant gratification, but I do think he can be very, very good. I just think that this year will be, maybe a little bit more developmental for him than maybe it's currently being considered. You kind of mentioned Lucas Giolito there earlier. He's my choice for AL Cy Young winner. I believe you went with Garrett Cole, who's starting for the Yankees today. You can see our predictions up at sportsnet.ca
That's
right
right.
now in the roundtable we did with Shy and Blair. But Lincoln on YouTube wants to know what our AL East predictions are. So, Ben, when you kind of look at this division, how do you see things shaking out?
Yankees are the best team. It's not even close. Like this team is stacked. They have an incredible lineup. They have a very good rotation, and their bullpen is good. So to me, they're not only the best team in the East, they're one of the best teams in baseball. I think they're going to win the World Series. So they are to me the number one. I have the Jays as number two, and I think there's a big gap between the Yankees and the Jays. I think the Yankees are way better, but the Blue Jays are a good team, and they do have a lot of questions on their pitching staff. But I see them making the playoffs and overcoming that because they have so much offensive firepower. So to me, the Jays are number two. They're not much ahead of the Rays. I have the Rays as a very good team that will contend all season long. The Red Sox around 500. And the Orioles, of course, are one of the worst teams in baseball.
Yep, that is
I
what
don't
they
think,
are.
yeah, no one's going to argue that. How about you, Arden? What's your pecking order in the East?
I was waiting for your supporting evidence, but I guess you don't really need any. The
No.
Orioles just are the Orioles. So I agree with the top and bottom. So I agree that the Yankees are the best team in the East, and I agree that the Orioles are the worst team in the East. I think those cases make themselves. I think it's the middle where I disagree with you a little bit. I think the Red Sox will be better than people are assuming. They were
Mm-hmm.
pretty bad last year, but I mean they've still got like a really, really good core of players. You think about Devers and Bogarts. They're gonna get Chris Sale back from Tommy John this year. They got some interesting young guys coming up. Think about Bobby Dalbec's guy. He might have an interesting season. Like I just think the Red Sox are going to be a lot better than what we saw last year. I could see them being, I don't. I could see them being a couple games over 500. You had them around 500. I could see them in the 84 to 85 win range. I think the Blue Jays, as I see it right now, are an 87 win team really. I think that with a healthy Kirby Yates and with George Springer being good to go, and Nate Pearson and Robbie Ray in the rotation, I could have seen them at 88 to 89. Kind of, I have downgraded those expectations a little bit. And then with the Rays, I do not know why everybody is doing their annual sleep on the Rays dance. Like, haven't we learned by now? I understand that Blake Snell's gone and Charlie Morton's gone, but the Rays have like this paper towel dispenser of hard throwing dudes with amazing spinning breaking stuff that they just like they cast away the Mortons and Snells when they get too expensive, and they just go cha-chunk and they pull out another one and cha-chunk and they pull out another one. It's the best minor league system in baseball and one of the most proven at developing and producing good young pitchers who can get outs at the big league level. So I refuse to sleep on the Rays. So as I look at it, I think the Yankees win this division. I think that the Rays finish second and
With
win
how
a
many
wild
wins?
card spot. 90,
Oh
89,
wow, so
90.
you're pretty high on the Rays then.
Yeah.
Wow.
And maybe even low 90s. Like, I think a wild card spot might take low 90s this
Hmm.
year. Just looking around the AL and seeing that the Twins will be good, the White Sox will be good, the Astros and the Angels will be good. Like, there's just going to be a lot of competition. So, yeah, I got the Rays in second. I got the Jays in third with like 87 wins. The Red Sox in fourth with like, I don't know, 84, 85. And then the Orioles in last with like, I don't know,
50.
seven
Yeah.
wins or something. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not going to be good.
But it's going to be an interesting division no matter what. Right. And I think that the Blue Jays are going to be very competitive in every game that they play against the Yankees and the Rays and these good teams. Like, that is the good progress and the good step that this club has taken. It's important to remember they lost over, 90 times. I mean, 2 years ago, it wasn't that long ago. So yeah, this is a much more competitive team than we've seen in the past. But unless there are some pretty like substantial development from within pitching wise, or like aggressive additions pitching wise mid-season, it's hard for me to see them getting surpassing 90 wins.
The Blue Jays.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I agree. I have the exact same win total for the Jays as you. I think 87 is a fair number. I think I just see them as being better than the Rays. And you compare these two offenses. Even looking at the lineup that the Jays just announced for opening day, I mean, it looks really good. It goes Semien, Biggio. Thinks it's Bo, Teoscar, Vlad. I might have that wrong, but in some order,
Yep,
you've got
that's the way
those,
it goes. Yeah.
and then the 8-9 is Grichuk Jansen, I believe. So you're looking at a lineup that's just so deep, and that's without Alejandro Kirk. That's without George Springer. This team is so strong offensively that, I know, sure, like Joey Wendell and Kevin Kiermaier are fine players, but they don't compare to this offense. And so I think the Jays will hit their way out of trouble this season.
Here's one for you, Ben. Michael on YouTube. How many starters do you think the Blue Jays will use this year? Was
Are
this an
we
over under for us?
I think it was. And I
Yeah.
guess my question there would be, are we counting openers? Because I
Yeah.
do think we'll see some openers.
Yeah. He's starting the
So
game.
16, something like that. I mean, it's going to be a high number when you think about just how many. And I know the last time the Blue Jays played a full season, they set a record, like a Major League Baseball record for pitchers used. I think it was 20 or
Yeah.
21. And so I'm not predicting that again because they should have a little bit more stability, but they are going to need a ton of starting pitchers to get through the season. Even the next few weeks, we're going to see them use probably 7 starters to get through the first few weeks of the season in a good scenario. So it's just, you need so much depth. So I'd put the number around 16.
Yeah. Off the top of my head, like Ryu, Stripling, Mats, Roark, Zoik, Pearson, Ray, Hatch, Merriweather. I think though that's 9. Those
You
9
say
will all
Thornton?
definitely. Didn't say Thornton. Yep, there's 10 off
Yeah.
the top of my head that I had like with almost 100% certainty. Those 10 will all make starts. I just got 10 just off the
Yeah.
top of my head. That doesn't include, if like Tommy Malone ends up having to make a spot start at some point. That doesn't include like the midseason Kevin Gosman
Right.
trade.
Exactly. Because
uh,
if they're contending, they almost certainly will be in the mix for pitching, both starters and relievers.
right. So yeah, I think I think around that 15, 16 territory. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Randy on Facebook, do you think the injury to George Springer is going to be one of those nagging injuries that could affect his whole season? I think that's part of the reason why he's not playing today, like, and why he's not going to play for the first at least 6 games of the year. He'll be eligible to come off the IL for the Blue Jays Dunedin opener on April 8th. Like, I think if it was up to George Springer, he'd be playing today. He'd be playing right now. And he has actually proven throughout spring that he can hit home runs and run around the outfield with a grade 2 oblique strain, which is kind of wild. Like, the Blue Jays
Yeah.
have this MRI that shows a rather significant injury, but then George Springer's in front of them saying like the symptoms aren't that bad and I can like perform as a ball player. I guess he just has an exceptionally high pain tolerance, and he's probably a guy who's used to playing through stuff. But it's a soft tissue injury on the eve of the season, and it's an oblique injury. When you think about as a hitter, how much you use your obliques when you're swinging, and not only when you're making contact, but you think about those swings when you don't make contact and you have to follow through and slow down your own momentum. You think about how much torque and strain that puts on your midsection. I think it's a prescient question from Andy because, yeah, this is something that could get worse over the course of the season. I think that's why the Blue Jays took this decision out of George Springer's hands and are going to try to settle this thing down now so it isn't something that lingers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about how important he is to this team, clearly the Blue Jays believe that, or they wouldn't have spent 150 million on him. Clearly, his track record says he can be and should be a huge contributor. So the Jays obviously hoping that it's not. But honestly, Randy, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to
Yeah.
really predict, and obliques do often linger. I mean, we saw that with Marcus Semien last year, so it can happen. I wish I could sit here and say, with 100% certainty that it will not linger and that they're going to nip it in the bud and that'll be no problem once he comes back. But we just don't know.
Yeah, the difference with Marcus Semien was like he was in his walk year, a 60-game season entering free agency. George
Yeah.
Springer got his money. He got his $150 million. So you can be a bit more cautious. Marcus Semien was at a point where like he felt like he had to be playing and he wanted to contribute to the team, right? Which is admirable as well. But he was at a point with that oblique thing last year where he wasn't even taking batting practice. Like he was like, I can't do this right now. He's having to spend inordinate amounts of time on the training table just to get ready to go out and play that night. So it's not a situation you want your star player to be in. If you're the Blue Jays, I think for George Springer, it makes sense not to do this. Like there will be time in August and September to play through injuries. Like that time is coming when it's a postseason push, perhaps even into the playoffs. Though that day will come. I just don't think that April 1st is that day. I think now is the time to be cautious and to really get this thing taken care of. Speaking of free agency, and a player who will not be going to free agency is Francisco Lindor. And Navarius on YouTube wants to know your thoughts, Ben. And I'm sure you have many on the Mets spending $350 million. I guess it was 341 over 10 were the official terms of the deal yesterday.
Yeah, just seeing this news this morning. So very interesting move on the part of the Mets. Not a shock, of course. They were said to be talking to Lindor, and anytime a player gets 300 million plus, I mean, it's hard to really say that the player didn't get a good deal. So you can certainly see why Lindor would make that move. And the Mets have always been a big market team. They're the biggest market of all, but they haven't always acted like that. They've sometimes really shied away from spending big and acquiring the big impact type players or retaining the big impact type players once they get them. And now, under the new ownership of Steve Cohen, it seems like they're very willing to go in a different direction and to be a bit bolder and to have a bit more confidence in the moves that they make and the players that they acquire. And Lindor, of course, is the perfect player to build around. 10 years of him, that's a really exciting move for the Mets. He's obviously a franchise cornerstone now for them. And it's the kind of move that if everything goes well, after that 10 years, I mean, we could be talking about Francisco Lindor as a Hall of Famer in a Mets cap, not a Cleveland one. And so this is that kind of legacy move that I think makes a ton of sense for the Mets and obviously makes them a much better team for 22 and beyond.
Yeah, Steve Cohen can afford it. You can go read about that guy's art collection. He'll just offload a Picasso or whatever. And yeah, there's the fancy. Find that change in between the couch cushions. But
That's right.
look, like the Toronto Blue Jays tried to get Francisco Lindor this offseason. Like they bid for him. They tried to get him like 2 off seasons ago. They've tried to trade for him a couple of times. And what's interesting about this deal from a Blue Jays perspective is now we know what it would have taken to extend Francisco Lindor. And like throughout the
Right.
offseason, I was advocating like, hey, if the Blue Jays are trading for Francisco Lindor and they're giving up like really high upside young talent, whether it's going to be Jordan Groshans or Austin Martin or whoever, Alec Manoah, Simeon Woods Richardson, whoever it would have been in that deal, like you'd better have some reasonable certainty that you can extend this guy. And now we know this is what it would have taken. It would have taken the Blue Jays being willing to go to 10 years, $341 million. The fact the Blue Jays got as far down the road with potentially trading for Lindor as they did indicates to me that there was willingness there to give out that kind of money and extend this kind of player, which is just an interesting sort of insight to have going forward.
It is. So, viewing it from the Blue Jays' perspective, is that a deal that you would have endorsed?
Yeah, no, for sure. But like I want players to get paid, right? I got you asked me from the Blue Jays perspective. I mean, he's as good of a bet as you can make. Young shortstop. He's been really durable, really productive by all accounts. And I've never covered him personally. I don't know him, but by all accounts, like a really strong clubhouse guy, like really strong leader and personality type of character dude that you want around your organization. Like if you're looking for a ball player in MLB to build around and to be a franchise cornerstone, I don't know if it gets that much better than Francisco Lindor, at his age and his position and his ability. It's hard to think of somebody, like, yeah, Tatis would be great, but the Blue Jays didn't have an opportunity to trade for Fernando Tatis. So those opportunities to trade to acquire players like that and extend players like that, so rare. So like I definitely would have been fine with it. How about you?
Yes, I would have. I think that's totally fine, totally fair. And it's a reminder too. I mean, so often these top players don't get to free agency, and that's where the Blue Jays, when they saw George Springer on free agency, they were super motivated to go out and get him because it's rare. And Springer is close to that tier. I mean, he might not over the course of the next 10 years because he's older. He's not going to rival Tatis. He's not going to rival Lindor. But over the next five, he should be an elite player. And so that's why they were so motivated to go out there. And it is too bad that he's not going to be there on opening day because Springer is one of the reasons the Blue Jays are so intriguing this year. But they sound like they believe it'll be a short term thing and that within 7, 8 days, he could be back.
Yeah, and it is interesting to think about it from the lens of next winter's free agency as well, or whenever free agency occurs next, right? With a potential work stoppage, it might not be next winter, we'll see. But the next round of free agency, when there is a rather large shortstop class available, you think about guys like Seager and Story and Correa who are going to be on the market. Lindor's contract does, in some ways set a little bit of a comp, right? A little bit of a precedent for what those guys might be asking for. But the Blue Jays' willingness to spend this offseason, willingness to talk about wanting to spend going forward, does also indicate they might be involved in that market and they might be making a rather large like financial outlay next winter again, as they did this winter with George Springer.
Oh yeah, I mean, you don't come this far and stop. And that's not to say they spend on the first shortstop or the first player who appears because they've already got a shortstop and we'll see how everything unfolds. But clearly, I think we can say without a lot of hesitation at this point, Arden, that they signed Ryu for, 80 million, they signed Springer for 150. They are not going to hesitate to spend. We've seen that in back-to-back off seasons, and I'm not thinking that that's about to stop at this point. They're going to have more needs, and so whether that's shortstops, I'd kind of maybe push them towards starting pitching at this point in time. But we'll see, and they might have the chance to address that at the deadline as well.
Scotty Scott on YouTube wants to know, why do you think they didn't take Liriano? Walks too high during spring? Question mark. I think that Francisco Liriano actually pitched pretty well during spring. I don't know that, like, I think his walks were fine, or at least in line with what you would expect from him. I think Tim Mesa just pitched that much better. And I think, like, credit to Tim Mesa for coming in off of Tommy John surgery, featuring this cool new two seamer that's been really effective for him that he developed while he was rehabbing, for pitching his ass off and winning a job on this team. Like, credit to him and everything that he did coming off of 18 months of rehab from Tommy John. And also credit to the Blue Jays for running a bit of a meritocracy. It's not just Alejandro Kirk winning the meritocracy with, at the catching position and getting the job over Reese McGuire, who, Kirk having options, McGuire not having options, the easy asset management thing to do would have been to option Kirk and keep McGuire, maintain your depth. Blue Jays didn't do that. And you look at the bullpen, Francisco Liriano, a guy who started like spring training ahead in the race to be that lefty, that second lefty in the bullpen. Like Tim Mesa beat him, was pitching better than him. The Blue Jays said, okay, we'll find a 40-man spot for Tim Mesa and bring him north of this team and cast Liriano aside. It's good to see. Like, it's funny to kind of like, it'd be congratulating a team for taking the best players, but it is good to see them taking the best players, Ben.
It is. It is. And I think you outlined it right there. Mesa pitched better. And if Mesa had needed more time, to work out, let's say, at the alternate site, then Liriano probably would have had a really good shot. They have the 40-man space to do that if they had wanted to. But I think it's as simple as you outlined it there, Arden. Mesa pitched better.
Yeah. 30 more minutes to go on our live chat here. We're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. You can throw your questions in any of the chat boxes available to you, and Drew Livingston will fire them into our chat box here. And we'll do a better job of going more rapid fire through these because we've been expanding quite a bit on the ones we've gone to this point. Here's a quick one for you, Ben. Rob Talks Sports on YouTube asks, over under 3 Blue Jays players with 100 or more RBI. So let's actually set that at 2.5 then. So 2.5 over under 100 runs batted in for Blue
Under.
Jays players. Under?
Yeah, under. It's rare. It's just
Yeah.
rare. You don't see a ton of 100 RBI seasons. So I would take the under. I would
I-
take the over on 0.5. I think someone does it, but it's just hard to bank on multiples.
No, yeah, I could see 2 guys doing it. It might be tough this year with health, man. I just think we're going to see so many injuries and so
Yep.
many moving parts on every club. Like, it's kind of funny the like focus we put on the opening day roster. Who's the backup catcher? Like, who's at the end of the bullpen? Oh, Joel Payamps is on the squad. I mean, Joel Payamps might not be on this team tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like, I just think that the amount of flux and the amount of churn that we're going to see on rosters is going to be severe, is going to be like a lot. So I just, I think you're gonna see a lot of injuries. You're gonna see a lot of, quote unquote workload management throughout the year for pitchers and position players as well. It might be hard to kind of put up some of those big volume numbers in the counting statistics this season as players kind of get used to a marathon after a sprint.
Love the over-unders. Anyone looking for more can check out the podcast. At the Letters just dropped with our full over-unders predictions. And anyone who listens to that will know that sometimes the under is the safe bet, even if it's not the most fun prediction to be making on opening day.
Sometimes the under is the head bet and the over is the heart bet.
That's usually the way it goes.
That's usually the way it goes. Fushpud on YouTube wants to know, Ben, opening day snack recommendations. I got nothing lined up, to be honest with you. Like, been a busy day. Haven't even eaten yet. So haven't even really thought about what I'm gonna eat today.
I would push that back to Fushpud. Send us your opening day snack recommendations. We could use inspiration. We're sitting here. I'm worried about ring lights and cable.
Yeah.
It's trying to make sure we got that lined up. So the snacks will come later. So yes, Fushpud, anyone else, send us your recommendations.
Seriously, when you're working the game, it's like, what's quick? Like, oh, protein bar, like a fistful of almonds type of deal. Like,
Right.
What can I just get into myself as quickly as possible that requires zero preparation? Dano on Twitter wants to know, do both Manoah and Woods Richardson see time with the big club this year? And would you say if they did, it would be from the pen? That's going to depend on health and performance. It's obviously impossible to predict those two things, but I think if those two guys stay healthy and if they go to AA, AAA, wherever they're going to start them, and they pitch well and they like layer in some really good development time over the first 2-3 months of the minor league season, and they're showing well and they're showing that they could help at the big league level in September and maybe even towards the end of August, then I think absolutely that opportunity is there. It's just contingent on some good things happening before then.
I think Manoah's chances are better than Woods Richardson. Age, development, he's a little ahead. And it's interesting. If I had to predict, I would say that it's more likely Manoah pitches out of the bullpen. But you can imagine situations like, just again, going back to this idea of attrition and how hard it's going to be for teams to get through the season. you can imagine starts on the table. And so that's like a best case scenario. By no means is that like a safe, default prediction, but I think that possibility does exist.
Yeah, like I think Alek Manoah could get outs from a major league bullpen today. Like with his fastball and slider, I think you could put him on a mound in high leverage spots, not to mention his like mentality and composure on the mound and just kind of doggedness, the way he attacks and comes right after you. You could put him on the mound in high leverage spots today, like in the Bronx, like at Yankee Stadium, and he would get outs, I'm pretty sure. That's not the ultimate goal for him though. Like that's not the outcome the Blue Jays want. The Blue Jays want him to be a starter, and they want him to be at the front of a rotation. And they want him to be, instead of like 2 to 3 outs every 2 to 3 days, they want him going out there and getting like 18 to 21 outs, every 5 to 6 days. So that's the development that's going to occur for Alek Manoah this year, and it's interesting because he's got so little track record as a professional. So it's just gonna be interesting to see him make some longer starts. Like as a professional, we have not seen this guy make a 4 inning start, a 5 inning start. So it's just gonna be cool to see him turn a lineup over and attack hitters different ways and try to maintain his fastball velocity and have different ways of attacking hitters, starting plate appearances with his changeup, starting with his breaking ball, pitching backwards, setting hitters up differently. I just think that's the development that has to occur for him over the first 3, 4 months of the year. But then certainly, like Ben, as you alluded to, like, it's September, and if you got a Jordan Romano injury or something, or Rafael Delis injury, and you need a big arm out of the bullpen, that's when the levers kind of shift from development being the priority to like, oh, win now is priority. And it's like, all right, we'll sacrifice a little bit of like Manoah development here to put him in our bullpen and get these high leverage outs that we need now so we can go to the postseason and try to win a World Series.
Right. And there are different ways to develop. Part of the development is to face major league hitters and do that in a major league stadium with the lights on and the TV cameras pointing at you. So I think that that's one of the challenges that Manoah will face at some point, and really his performance will help dictate exactly when that is.
Ben, I'm going to shoot this question to you and I'm going to cede the floor because it's your favorite topic. It's from Alan on Facebook. Is this the year where Vladdy finally lives up to the hype?
Well, the hype is real. I mean, Vladdy has encountered probably more hype than just about anyone in the course of his first couple seasons, and rightfully so. He was such a good prospect, and he just didn't live up to it. But I do think this is the year that he does, at least offensively. Defensively, I'm going to have to see it to believe it. And by it, I mean I'm going to have to see him be an adequate defender before I believe it. Not even talking about being good or above average, or like let's not even go there. But I'll have to see him be adequate to believe it. But offensively, I think that he has incredible potential starting right now, and I won't be surprised at all if he breaks out in a huge way this year. I think that you look at the work that he's put in, you look at where he's at physically right now, comes out of spring healthy, had a great performance. These things are lining up, and there's no guarantee of that, Arden, but Vlad Jr. is someone with just immense offensive potential.
If he just hits and he just fulfills that offensive potential, nobody's going to talk about his defense. Nobody's going to care. Like it's not going to be as much of a topic as it's been.
Right.
It's like there's a magnifying glass on it now because he hasn't quite lived up to that potential. He has been merely an above average hitter at the major league level at the age of 21, which by the way, not the easiest thing to do.
Right.
I just think that, if he is shooting laser beams all over the yard this year as he was in spring training, and take spring training results with like a massive grain of salt because they are what they are, but the exit velocity was there and the line drive contact was there in a big way. It seemed like the launch angle came up a little bit, which is huge for him, just beating fewer balls into the ground and just getting the ball coming off of his bat with that like 10+ degree launch angle. So it's either a line drive or a fly ball. I think the results will come from that because this guy hits the ball as hard as anybody, and his approach we've seen in the minor leagues is like extremely disciplined. I think at times he expanded over the last couple of years, but if he can just kind of make some better swing decisions and get back to the discipline and patience that we saw in the minors, yeah, sky's the limit. Sky's the limit for him. Speaking of defense, Rob wants to know: do the Blue Jays have the potential to be an above average defensive team in 2021? It was hard to get a real sense of this without being in Dunedin and without seeing as many spring games as we normally do. I'm not expecting them to be like too much above average. Like maybe I think they'll be around average. They could be a little bit above average, a little bit below average, but I think they'll be around that kind of like 13 to 17 in terms of whatever ranking of defensive metric you want to take. I don't think they'll be among the worst. I certainly don't think they'll be among the best. I think they'll just be in that murky middle.
I think that's fair. I mean, you look at where can they be above average, and I think catcher Jansen can be above average as a defender. I think second base with Semyon, a shortstop playing second, that could be above average for this team, and Springer could be above average in center field. So that's three spots, maybe Grichuk too in right. However, first below average, third, Biggio we'll see, right? But it's still his first full year at that position. So I would peg it right now as below average. Bo, I think so far has been a little below average with the glove at the toughest position. So not saying he should be a shortstop, he can play shortstop, but relative to Andrelton Simmons or your Carlos Correa's, like I'm not sure that Bo is there right now.
Yeah.
And then Lourdes is probably below average too. So yeah, I think that on the whole, probably closer to average than above.
Mike on Twitter wants to know how short of a leash do you think Tanner Roark is on in the starting rotation if he comes into the season and pitches poorly or has similar outings like he did last season? So if the Blue Jays were fully healthy and if Robbie Ray was in the rotation making starts and Nate Pearson was fine and if Thomas Hatch hadn't injured his elbow, I would say the leash should be pretty short for Tanner Roark if he was suffering the same results as he did last season. That said, Tanner Roark, like one of his best traits in baseball and something that he does that not that many starting pitchers do, takes the ball every five, man. He takes it and he gives you five and dive. And like, yeah, he's not going to be elite. He's not going to be among the league leaders in strikeout rate or in home runs allowed, like on the good side of home runs allowed, obviously, or an ERA, but he gives you, five serviceable innings. And that's going to be so valuable this year as clubs across baseball are scrambling to make up innings and are dealing with overwhelming injuries to their pitching staff and are like digging deep into their 40-man roster to find guys to make starts and, throw bulk out of bullpens. So I just think the Blue Jays like will need Tanner Roark's innings, even if they aren't exceptional. Like if you got, and like this is not going to be a number that blows anybody's mind, but if you got a 5 ERA out of Tanner Roark over 100, 120 innings, I think the Blue Jays will take that.
I think so. Absolutely. Now, there's a line for every pitcher where the bulk isn't worth it if there's no quality attached to it. So there's always that balancing act for any pitcher, including Roark. Now, I find it hard to envision any month, no matter how bad, for the opening month of the season that would lead to Roark losing his job, just given
Yeah.
where the team is at from a depth standpoint. But I think once we're into the month of May, if some of those pitchers start coming back, and if Roark has a 6.8 ERA the way he did last year, that equation changes a little bit. And that's not what I'm predicting. I think he will be able to be more serviceable, but there's a leash on everybody. And if you're not performing for any player on this team, they're going to see a change in role or a reduction in playing time.
It would have to be like really bad process. Like the velocity would have to have declined by a ton and you have to, not be finding the zone. And like it would have to look bad. You know what I mean? More
Mm-hmm.
so than just the results. But
But that's
um,
possible.
it is possible. I'm not expecting it. Like you look at the track record of Tanner Roark, you look at what he did over the first 6 seasons of his career, remarkably consistent with like a
Exactly.
very league average ERA and putting up a wealth of innings. So I'm not going to look at like what was probably like a 45 inning sample in 2020 and write the guy off and say
Yeah,
that that's what he is
agreed.
when there is a massive like amount of 160 and 180 inning seasons before that. He's had a 200 inning season before. I think you rely on that track record to project him forward, but we're going to find out because I promise you this guy's going to log a lot of innings in April because that's one thing he does. He gives you innings, and the Blue Jays really need them right now.
Absolutely. There is no question. They need Roark, they need Mats, they need Stripling, all three of those guys.
Noam Ueno on YouTube wants to know when it comes playoff time, who do you think will have the starting catching job? Alejandro Kirk or Danny Jansen, Ben?
Well, I think the short answer is it'll be shared. Jansen catches Ryu. That's not going to change at this point. So, and Ryu's starting, probably one quarter of any playoff games that the Blue Jays would play, maybe more. So Jansen plays a lot. And then, I mean, based on what we've seen, it's very easy to imagine that Kirk could out hit Jansen. And so if that's the case, let's say it's Robbie Ray, who's worked very closely with Kirk, then Kirk will catch. So with catchers, you're always looking at a timeshare anyway. It's a question of how you're splitting it. Is it 60-40? Is it 40-60? But you're never really going to dip too far in one direction because these guys need rest. And the days of, asking Russell Martin did it once where he caught like 150 games, but you just don't do that in this day and age.
No, yeah, you really, really rarely see it. And I do think like while catcher defense doesn't quite stand out to us as much as like a 112 mile per hour Alejandro Kirk frozen rope off the right center field wall, while it's not quite as glamorous and quite as sexy, it is really important.
Yeah,
Game calling, blocking balls in the dirt, anticipation, reading hitters' swings, managing the running game, just like understanding what's happening, having like the trust of your pitcher that when you throw down the sign and you say, no, I want you to throw this cutter here, that pitcher will like have that faith in it and will believe in you and will throw it with conviction and throw it as and execute it as well as possible. Like these little things that don't pop up and don't necessarily stand out to everybody, but the players will tell you are really, really important. So it's going to be key to kind of watch the progress of that with Alejandro Kirk and watch how he comes along defensively this year. Cause like the guy's hit at every level, and I know the samples are small, but I have like a high degree of confidence that he'll be able to hit at the big league level and he'll be able to put up like, especially for a catcher, pretty impressive offensive numbers. But how does he come along on the defensive side of things and game calling and game management? Like that's really what we need to watch with him this year.
absolutely. And we'll find out a lot about Kirk. He's on that list of players, like you said off the top, that we're going to learn a lot about this season.
Owen on Facebook, do you think Jonathan Davis could be included in a trade for a starting pitcher at some point this year? I mean, I don't know why it would be Jonathan Davis. I'm not looking at Jonathan Davis being traded right now. I do think the Blue Jays are going to look to acquire starting pitching this year. And I do think that the Blue Jays need to keep in close touch with the Giants about Kevin Gausman, with the Mariners about James Paxton, with the Reds about Sonny Gray. Like, I do think that there's no reason to wait for the trade deadline to upgrade this rotation. Like, if there is an opportunity in May or in June, I know it's somewhat rare to see deals at that time, but if there's an opportunity there to swing a deal and bring in a starting pitcher and make this pitching staff better, I think the Blue Jays should jump on it.
For sure. I mean, they need it now. So absolutely, I think that makes sense. As for Jonathan Davis, I don't think he would have a ton of trade value. I think he's
Yeah.
useful as a bench player, but I think that's how other teams would evaluate him. And so I don't think that you would see a team come to the Blue Jays and say, "Hey, we'd really like to get Jonathan Davis. We're willing to give up big league pitching off our major league staff to get him." I don't see that happening.
Michael on YouTube wants us to pick the player with the biggest potential for a surprise breakout or monster year. And then on the other side of that coin, the player with the biggest potential for underperformance. Do you want me to start? I'll not to rain on the Alejandro Kirk parade, as I've been singing his praises throughout this this live chat. But it is possible that the minor league sample is incredibly small and the big league sample is 25 plate appearances, and he struggles as a young player in the majors. Like that's not a crazy outcome for a guy of his age with the lack of experience, with the demands that are going to be placed on him as a catcher in the big leagues. You think about it, it's not just the 3 hours that we see on TV, with Buck and Tabby and Dan calling the action. Like it is the entire day. It's pitchers meetings and catchers meetings early in the day, and it's catching bullpens and it's game planning. It's understanding that like QB card that you got on your wrist. It's reading swings. It's dealing with the coaching staff. It's working on your own game, working on your own swing at the plate, working on your defense. I mean, it's coming into Zoom meetings with Ben and I to try to give us insights into the game. Like these guys just have really, really full days. And it's a lot of workload over a 6-month grind. Alejandro Kirk's never done it before. So I don't think it would be unreasonable to expect that he might struggle to adapt to the highest level of the game. On the breakout side, let me think about that. Who you got, Ben?
Breakout, Lourdes Gurriel Jr. I think
Hmm.
he's been a hitter his entire time, and it's been over split seasons. So people don't quite realize how good he has been. But don't be surprised if at the end of the year he's got 30 homers and an 850 OPS. Disappointment, I would go with the players who now have the highest expectations. So George Springer, Bo Bichette, those are the guys that we're expecting the most from. Therefore, they are the ones who could disappoint us the most.
I'll go with Tellez for my breakout. He's the guy who like had a pretty strong spring in terms of like putting the ball in play really hard. He just didn't see great results. Is a little bit unlucky this spring, so I don't know that his actual outcomes and results reflect the process.
Right.
But he's a guy who's always hit the ball very hard. At the end of last year, showed some like very real adjustments in terms of discipline and approach and his swing selection is very much like a Justin Smoke progression. Like
Yeah.
just kind of stop chasing crap and trusted his power and stop trying to hit a home run with every swing. So if he is making much better swing decisions this year and forcing pitchers into the zone and getting pitches to barrel, Rowdy Tellez can barrel them. So I'll pick him as my potential
Nice.
breakout this year. What do we got here? Eli on Facebook. Do you think bringing in Simeon and Springer will already make a difference in cutting down on bad base running? Will make a lot of differences, but what about on the base paths?
Interesting. Man, I think the biggest difference on that front is just having Jonathan VR hit free agency because he was a disaster when he was here. Yeah, I think it'll help to have experienced and professional base runners, and Springer and Semyon seem to be that. Like basically, base running shouldn't be like Vladdy. Sometimes can be reckless. We saw VR was just like totally, on another level when it came to doing that, and not in a good way. But basically, what it comes down to is making good judgment calls. And I'm not even going to say thinking it through because I don't think it's thought. I think it's just judgment in the moment that's kind of hardwired into you with your experience in those situations. And that's something that experience helps with. So Semi and Springer, I'd be lying if I said I had a super accurate read on how well these guys run the bases. But generally speaking, veterans don't make as many mistakes.
Yeah. And generally speaking, veterans take fewer chances, is
Yeah.
the other thing, right? They take fewer risks. So I don't know. It's a fine line between reckless and aggressiveness. And oftentimes, like the outcome determines how we feel about it. Where, like, if
Yeah.
something works out, maybe the guy should have been gunned out by a mile, but the throw was offline or the third baseman dropped it or something like that. And it gets in. And all of a sudden it's portrayed as, oh, what a great aggressive move. Like,
Yep.
how heady a play that was. But then if the guy gets thrown out, even if it's by a fraction or a hair, and even if like, percentage wise, 51 of the 100 dice rolls would have ended up with safe and 49 would have ended up without, but he gets out. It's how could you do that?
Yep.
What were you thinking? You're so selfish, right? So you try to like remove the outcome from it and just look at each situation on a case by case basis and see, where are you at in the game? What's the score, who's coming up to play, right? Like understanding that situational stuff, like who's in the on deck circle, like who are you possibly taking a plate appearance away from, those things factor into it. But I will say, like, more often than not, I appreciate an aggressive approach and I appreciate guys who try to force the issue on the base pass. That is at least the product and brand of baseball that I want to watch, even if sometimes guys will get gunned out and it'll drive people nuts.
It always happens. Anytime you make an out, people are going to be unhappy, of course, with that.
Ty on Facebook, just for fun, who do the Jays add to the rotation before the deadline? If so, who could they target? I think Kevin Gossman will be a Toronto Blue Jay at some point. It's just they love him. They like his strikeout to walk. The Giants probably going to have a tough time in that division with the Dodgers and Padres. Gossman on a 1-year deal. Blue Jays have tried to sign Gossman like repeatedly and weren't able to. And the other factor, the Giants kind of have to trade him because they qualifying offered him and they can't do that again. So they kind of have to move him if they're not going to be contending. So I think that Ross Atkins and Farhan Saidi are, finding some sort of a deal there at some point this year.
I like that prediction. I will toss another name in there, and without spoiling at the letters, which again is now available, I'll say keep an eye on James Paxton of the Seattle Mariners.
Interesting. Steve on YouTube, do the Jays have enough pitching to win around in the playoffs this year? I actually would argue that they do if healthy, because like Ryu, if healthy, great. Nate Pearson, I don't know if people forgot. Go watch him against Tampa last year in the postseason in that 2-game series. Like, dude was electric. And it happened at a time when the game was kind of out of hand, the series was out of hand. A lot of people had kind of moved on with their lives, but he came in and was like dominant and untouchable. That guy in a playoff atmosphere could be very, very good. So you put those two together with like if a Robbie Ray is pitching well at the time, or if it's Steven Matz who's pitching well at the time, plus whatever you've acquired at the deadline, if it's Paxton, if it's Gosman, if Manoah is up and pitching at that
Well, he
point,
said
I
right now, didn't he?
do you say right now? Well, okay, but like this, the playoffs aren't right now. The playoffs are in October.
Right.
So if Manoah's up at that point, like I think absolutely the Blue Jays could have the pitching to win a playoff series, no doubt.
I think they do. I agree. And I think, my answer to this mostly comes down to their offense. Like if your pitching is even passable with the offense that they have, they can hit their way out of trouble. So, I guess that's a roundabout way, and maybe I'm dodging the question a little bit here, but I think the pitching is like it's good enough. And when you look at the offensive players they have, they could win a playoff game 9-4 or 9-6, and that still counts.
Yeah, it's just also impossible on April 1st to determine what a roster is going to look like on October 1st. The Blue Jays team is going to be completely different. Like the group of guys that finished this season are going to be completely different than the group of guys who are in the Bronx today. And our like preconceived notions and assumptions about a lot of them will have been proven either completely wrong or very right, but in most cases, completely wrong about a lot of guys. There'll be contributors that you aren't expecting who are going to have big seasons. There'll be guys who you're penciling in to be like stalwarts on this roster who you're going to look back on it and be like, oh, he only played 25 games, or oh, like he didn't hit at all. Like you just can't predict 6 months out from now. You just got to enjoy the ride. Josh on YouTube, we'll end here because this is a good one to wrap up on. Ben, what would you consider a good season, and what would you consider a disappointing season?
To me, this one is pretty simple. I think a good season is if the Blue Jays make the playoffs and play some playoff games, see what happens from there. Roll some dice in October and see where things lead. I think part of a good season also includes some strides forward from young players, both in the majors and in the minors. But that's where I would set the level for success. And then disappointment, I think, is just on the other side of that. If they are not contending until the final week of the season, this year has been a disappointment. They should be contending until the end. And so if they finish 81-81 and they're 5.5 games out of the wild card on September the 15th, that's not a good year. I'm sorry, it's not. But again, I'm predicting that they're going to make it. So I think that they have the pieces in place for this to be a very good season.
Yeah, disappointing would be like if the Blue Jays got to the trade deadline and we're like so far out of it that the
Oh
front
yeah.
office was like, we're not even gonna push all in, go acquire players for this club. Like a really disappointing season would be it's August and it's a write off.
Or
To me,
September.
that's right. That's a really disappointing season.
Yeah.
Finishing below 500 is a really disappointing season for this team. Should be above 500. I'm just saying these are what the
Yeah.
disappointments would be. Ben, you're
Yeah.
looking at me like I'm, like this is that's
I
what a
think we can
disappointing
raise
season would
the
be to me.
expectations higher than that, though. Like, I think they should be in the playoffs.
I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, but you're higher on them than I am. So those are the disappointing seasons to me. To me, a good season would be making the playoffs, like in a best case scenario. But I think 87 wins isn't going to do it this year, which is where I think the Blue Jays are going to be. So I think a good season will be, taking steps, being above 500, continuing to show growth, continuing to be as competitive as the Blue Jays were last season against the league's best teams, so against the Yankees, and when they're playing the White Sox, when they're playing the Twins and the Astros, like being competitive in those games, hanging in those games, and then continue development, man. Like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. having a strong, healthy season. Same thing for Bo Bichette and Kevin Biggio. Nate Pearson, strong, healthy season of results and productivity and like starting to get closer to your potential. And then that goes down into the minor league system as well. Alec Manoah and Simeon Woods Richardson continuing to layer good development in. Maybe getting a surprise from somewhere, like a Thomas Hatch coming back from his elbow injury and being, an answer in the rotation. Or if TJ Zoik proved to be an answer in the rotation, like somebody from within the system, like taking steps to prove they can be a solid everyday major league contributor, that would be a really positive outcome this year. So, those are the things I'll be looking at, Ben.
Fair enough. And I think, yeah, it should be fun to watch starting in what, 7 minutes? Like, here we go. It's all beginning right now.
7 minutes on Sportsnet, on TV, on radio, everywhere you consume Blue Jays games. You can go watch that, listen to that right now. We thank you for coming along here. We want to thank our producer, True Livingston, for all of his work that he put into this, whether you're on Facebook, you're on YouTube, you're on Twitter, you're on sportsnet.ca, wherever you watch this. We thank you so much. You can get Ben and I at sportsnet.ca. You can listen to us on At the Letters. Enjoy opening day. It's finally here. Hyunjin Ryu, Garrett Cole in the Bronx coming at you now. Thanks for being with us.